2, 3.
Hello everyone and welcome to the Bitter Popcorn. Be careful when watching this scary movie. You might get the wrinkles. You'll squint a lot to see a monster in the dark. In the last 20 years, there have been so many Boogeymans that you don't even pay attention to the new ones anymore. That's why I thought it was just another movie where the filmmakers changed the name. But no, I was wrong. This is the real Boogeyman, based on a story by Stephen King from early 1970s. A bit of backstory. The Boogeyman is a story written by Stephen King in 1973, which was included in the collection Night Shift 5 years later. In this short story, the narration is done through the monologue of Lester Billings, who is telling his psychologist that the Boogeyman killed his children. Considering the unconventional ending, although by today's standards quite predictable, but that the story was written 50 years ago, the Boogeyman gained unprecedented popularity. Some movies were made based on the story. I can say that in 1980 there was a movie called Boogeyman, but it's a horror movie about a childhood trauma and not related to the story of the book. The first one is from 1982 and it's not very impressive. It's a short film. Then from 2005 to 2008 there was a trilogy, but the quality of the script could have been better. And a few years later there was a Moroccan-French remake of a questionable quality called Boogeyman from 2018. But recently another movie was released that used the story of the King of Horror as its basis. But is it worth watching? Let's find out. The latest news surprised me, because despite knowing the writer's library somewhat, I have never encountered a story with such title before. I started to research it on the internet. It turns out that the poster that mentions the book is not lying, but the film's author stretched the truth. There really is a tiny king's story they used as basis. It seems like they took the introduction from there and it's just a couple of sentences. Everything else in the movie is entirely made up by screenwriters and has no connection to any Stephen King's books. I wonder if Stephen King himself even knows about Boogeyman was made based on this story.
I don't know what I'm going to do with these people.
However, Boogeyman is not a low-quality film. It had a successful run in American theaters, making around $45 million and an additional $25 million worldwide. That's why I decided not to miss out on what a global audience was watching, and also checked out this new release. For director R. Savage, Boogeyman was his first big-budget work. Before that, he directed low-budget horror films, and his debut wasn't very successful. So the story is about Will Harper, along with his two daughters, Sawyer and Sadie, is struggling to cope with the loss of his wife who died in a car accident. The man is a psychiatrist who conducts therapy sessions in his home. One day, a disturbed man named Lester Billings comes to see him as a patient. Lester tells a horrifying tales that a normal person wouldn't believe, claiming that a sinister entity called the Boogeyman killed his 3 children. This element is similar to a story by Stephen King. Concerned about Lester's unstable state, Will calls the police, but the patient hangs himself in the closet, thereby releasing the Boogeyman into a new home where a little girl now resides, and she's in for a tough time. A few days later, Sawyer, the younger daughter, starts behaving strangely and seeing some otherworldly monster that feeds on nightmares and pain. Chaos develops in the house. The Boogeyman is a very strange horror movie in which the director decides to scare the audience mainly with sounds, eerie noises and jump scares, supported by a completely uninteresting secondary dialogues. By the way, yes, the film reminds one of the old school horror movies where the characters aimlessly fear some unknown creature that they never actually show. The Boogeyman is revealed only for a moment when you've already lost hope of seeing it. Yes, the director finally gets a conscience, and someone appears in the pitch darkness, so the main characters do manage to fight back. It feels like the director had only one question in mind: how to use a dark room to the maximum extent. Unfortunately, all the scary scenes still end up being cliché and not scary at all. It's all been done before, and much better. All jump scares are uninspired. There is nothing memorable about them. Nighttime fears never lose their relevance, but their presentation here is dreadful. The plot is complicated due to its lack of originality. It's a routine story about a nighttime monster. It lacks uniqueness or depth. Who is this monster, and what does it want?
What the hell are you?
It simply exists to make the movie, and that's actually quite terrible. The family is secondary here as well. By genre standards of the most basic horror films, you have a grieving family that recently suffered a loss. They all try to come up to terms and walk around looking sad, but the appearance of the Boogeyman is supposed to bring them back together. Look, in other words, the plot introduces an outdated metaphor of supernatural evil around which the family is supposed to unite. Of course, the father doesn't believe in the entity, and the children do, and somehow they need to convince him otherwise.
I'm gonna ask you a question. Okay, I don't want you to get mad.
What?
Were you high?
It's an old, worn-out trope. Even before the full movie release in theaters, the film seemed interesting to me, even without any promotion. Firstly, it's always interesting to see how the creators can develop a plot from a short story. Secondly, during test screenings, the initial version of the film scared the audience too much, so a decision was made to reshoot it. This strange and incorrect decision had a significant impact on the quality of the film. Considering the brevity of the source material, the creators managed to create and expand a full-fledged story where drama successfully combines with horror. The storytelling makes the viewer uncomfortable, linked to the eerie connection between the unseen monster and the feeling of loss. However, the problem is that the story unfolds too slowly. Very few important plot events happen in 1.5 hours, and the rest of the time is filled with repetitive actions by the characters. And surprisingly, there are very few jump scares in the film, which is unusual and disappointing for this type of movie. These facts lead to one disappointing conclusion: the new Boogeyman turned out to be standard horror movie that doesn't differ from 100 similar horror films that are released regularly. Many moments seem strange and illogical. A father and his children live in the same house, but nobody reacts to the screams of one of the family members. The majority of the plot relies on unconventional events, and viewers tend to overlook various unpredictabilities. But if you approach the story from a standard, logical perspective, the plot simply stops making sense. You just have to enjoy viewing. In the same time, the script contains some obvious truths, like dealing with loss and trying to listen to others, and so on. In one of the interviews, director Rob Savage said that he considers Boogeyman his best work. But compared to his previous films, today's movie is a bit weak, but most viewers are unlikely to agree with that. It's an unremarkable and a standard horror film based on a very well-known story, and it turned out to be a cliché horror movie about a monster from nightmares. Nevertheless, guys, it was still interesting to see this adaptation of a Stephen King story. Thanks a lot for watching, guys. Like if you liked it, subscribe, and don't forget to leave a comment. And see you in the next episode.